Well, this is good attendance today. This is the third and final in a sermon series about how God changes us, the transformation that we are looking for. If you've been following my preaching over the last 2 or 3 years and my thinking, sometimes it shows up in the columns, I've really been fascinated by this question about how we take our faith, our decision or commitment to follow Jesus, and turn it into a kind of lifestyle that helps us to live more joyfully and passionately. And that's what we all want, isn't it? When I read those Pew surveys where we see the number of people, each time you read one of these, more people are leaving the congregation that they grew up in and becoming uncommitted, sometimes dropping their faith altogether. And it just occurs to me, if that's happening, why is it happening? So I think that all of us, whether we are people of faith or whether we are agnostics or people who don't believe in God at all of us are looking for opportunities to change in ways that make life more joyful, more meaningful, more passionate. So that's what this series has really been about. Last week we preached two texts that I think are really fascinating when you put them side by side. Last week we preached about the rich young ruler who had every opportunity to make a significant change in his life and lots of resources with which to do it and decided not to. Today we look at a man named Zacchaeus who you would have thought wouldn't have, but does. And I think these two stories together are really inform us about what is involved in changing your life in a way to bring more meaning and purpose. So today we read from Luke. Luke is the only gospel writer that tells the story of Zacchaeus. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and he was rich. That's the one thing. He was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him because he was going to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." And so Zacchaeus hurried down and was happy to welcome Jesus. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He is going to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Last Sunday night, I was sitting in the den trying to figure out something to do. Football season is over. That occupies my Sunday afternoons and Sunday evenings when we got pro football going on. At any rate, I was sitting there and the Oscars came on. I'm not a big Oscars person at all. I don't go to every now and then I'll watch a movie on TV, but I don't go to the theater very often because I'm an outside person. Spending 3 hours inside a big dark place doesn't sound fun to me. I think the last movie I saw in the theater was No Country for Old Men, and that was about 10 years ago, and I went to see it because I'm a Cormac McCarthy fan. I've read everything that Cormac McCarthy has written. But anyway, I'm sitting there and the Oscars came on and I thought, I'll give this a try. And I got into it. I thought it was relatively entertaining. So I watched it for an hour and a half. As I was watching the Oscars, my mind went back to the text that I preached on last Sunday morning, the story of the rich young ruler. And I got a little bit creative with this. I was watching the awards for the directors and so forth. And I asked myself, if I was a director of a movie about the life of Jesus, who would I choose to play the part of the rich young ruler? And the more I thought about it, I thought, that's really easy. Brad Pitt, right? I mean, this is so obvious. Brad Pitt, handsome, rich, he has everything going for him. Brad Pitt would be the rich young ruler. He was well known, he was famous, he had power, prestige, he had money, he was in good standing with all of the Jews. And yet, of course, it was the rich young ruler who turned down the opportunity to change his life. So by the time I thought about this, I was really getting into it. What would it be like to be a Hollywood director? And I thought, if I were producing a movie or directing a movie about the life of Jesus, who would play the part of Zacchaeus? And this one was even easier than the rich young ruler. Danny DeVito, of course. Of course. Danny DeVito is short. The Zacchaeus was short. He didn't have any friends. He was despised. Who could play that part better than Danny DeVito? So when we look at this story, we know it is about an unusual man, the character who makes his appearance here in Luke, and we never read about him again. And yet it's such a remarkable story. And the story revolves around two important, extremely important symbolic acts on the part of Zacchaeus. The first act was climbing a tree in order to see Jesus. Now, this particular act really has, as we look at this, if you can imagine this in the imaginary movie about Jesus, we see that it's symbolic in two ways, actually. On the one hand, we see Zacchaeus up there in this tree, and it is symbolic of the social isolation which he was experiencing. It is very clear that Zacchaeus was rich, but that was it. Nobody else liked him. Years ago, Irma Bombach wrote a book about letters written to children who were undergoing chemotherapy for cancer treatments. It was a really cute book. Could bring a tear to your eye. It was very meaningful, and then it was funny in ways. And I'll never forget her telling about a class of elementary age children, third or fourth grade, who wrote a letter to a classmate who was in the hospital receiving chemotherapy. And they said, you know, dear, whatever his name says, we hope you get better. We're thinking of you. We all like you except for John. How would you like to get a letter like that? But in the case of Zacchaeus, it was just the opposite. Nobody liked Zacchaeus. And so we see him up there, and it's important for us to see Danny DeVito up there in that tree, utterly despised by nearly everybody in town because he was a tax collector, socially isolated. But the other and even more important symbolic point to make about Zacchaeus being in the tree is that he was extremely curious. He climbed the tree because he was curious about Jesus, because he wanted to know more about Jesus. Now look, whenever we read these stories in the New Testament, this is more often the case than is not. Oftentimes there is a backstory that we do not know. And this is surely the case with this story. We don't know what Zacchaeus knew about Jesus or why he was curious. Is it possible he had seen Jesus on another occasion? Maybe he had heard the rumors about Jesus. Maybe he had heard about the healing miracles of Jesus. Maybe, this is what I kind of think, maybe he had run into some of the disciples or followers of Jesus and he saw, wow, these are people who are so joyful and passionate in life. I mean, that is what we all want, isn't it? I mean, that's why we come to church. That's why we do what we do. We want to somehow live lives that are more joyful and passionate, more meaning and purpose. We're not sure, but we do know that he climbed that tree because he was curious about Jesus. He wanted to put his eyes on Jesus. I can promise you that if you open your New Testament and look for the word curiosity, you're not going to find it in the list of spiritual gifts. You know, there's a section that Paul writes where he talks about the spiritual gifts. Curiosity isn't there. He'll talk about proclamation or exhortation, about prophecy, about healing and miracles, about wisdom. But you're not going to find curiosity. And when you get to that list of fruits of the Spirit, curiosity is a no-show. Peace, love, kindness, all of that, but not curiosity. But I'll just tell you that I've come to the conclusion that curiosity should be one of the primary spiritual gifts, because for most of us, The spiritual journey begins with curiosity. We want to have a better life. We come to church. We accept an invitation to church. We begin to read the Bible. We join a Bible group or a small group of some kind. We're driven by curiosity. And Jesus said, if you are to become a part of the kingdom of God, you must become like a child. What do you suppose he meant by that? You must become like a child if you want to enter the kingdom of God. I don't know about you, but when I think of children, especially young children, 4, 5, and 6 years old, the first thing that comes to my mind is that they are curious. They are extraordinarily curious human beings. Unfortunately, that kind of goes away, kind of gets sucked out of them as they deal with life. Almost 4 years ago, almost exactly today, I had to put down my old roping horse, my cow horse, Red. We started off the winter, and Red started losing weight. Every time I went out there to feed him, he had lost weight. I changed his feed. I got him some of that feed for senior horses. I gave him more hay. I wormed him. I did everything I could, but he just kept losing weight. I knew that he wouldn't live through the winter. I just thought, I'm not going to put him down until I say that he's suffering. And so we just kept feeding him and watching him. The thing I feared more than anything else is that he would suffer. So just about this time of the year, towards the end of the winter, I went out there one day, and I opened the end of the west end of the barn, and I looked out there, and I saw him on the end of the pasture, the west end of the pasture. He was laying down. I thought he was dead. I walked out there. And he wasn't. He raised his neck and his head, and he made a noise. He recognized me. But he couldn't get up. He wasn't strong enough to get up. So I knew that the time had come. It was my responsibility to help him get to where he needed to be. And I did. And I buried him right there in that spot. A few days later, I took my grandson, Ben, to the ranch with me. Ben was 4 years old. And Ben loved going to the ranch. He thought he was so big. Ben would try to get a pail of cubes for the cows, and he'd try to carry it by himself. He loved doing ranch chores. And so we got there, and we fed the cows and did some things. And I said, let's go feed the horse. And of course, I had dreaded this moment. We opened the east end of the barn and walked in, and then the west doors we opened. And Bella, my mare, came trotting right up. And immediately Ben said, of course, immediately he said, where's the other one? I'd hoped he wouldn't notice, but of course he did. Where's the other one? And I said, well, Ben, Red's not here anymore. I was trying to deflect or redirect. Red's not here anymore. And he said, well, why not? You know this story, don't you? He said, why not? I said, well, he's just not here. Why not? He said, Ben, Red got sick. He said, what happened to him? I said, Red died. He said, why did he die? And where did he go? Aren't those the most profound questions that we have in life? Sometimes we grow old and we stop asking those questions, but children know the deepest and most profound and fundamental questions about life and death, about mortality and immortality, about what it means to live in this life knowing that this life comes to the end and there's some mystery that lies beyond. Is there a greater spiritual gift than the gift of curiosity? For Zacchaeus, curiosity was the beginning of a changed life. And let me just say to you as an aside that this is the reason I am a Methodist. You know, we say this around here all the time. We say, when you walk into this sanctuary, please don't check your brain at the door. because we welcome and we embrace the questions that we have and the struggles that we deal with. Methodism is not perfect. Far from it. We have our struggles, don't we? And you can go to a church where they'll say, check your brain at the door. I don't mean to be critical of any other church, but it's important to make these distinctions. You can go to a church where they say, check your brain at the door, because the preacher is going to tell you everything you need to know. The preacher will tell you how to think about every ethical question. The preacher is going to tell you how to think about the political issues that we're dealing with. In this church, we say, don't check your brain at the door, because we want you to be curious. And we want you to ask the tough questions in life. And we want you to struggle with them right along with the rest of us and learn from one another. Curiosity, what a remarkable spiritual gift. For Zacchaeus, it was the beginning of a changed life. Act 2 in this movie is when Zacchaeus comes down from the tree. Jesus comes along. He sees Zacchaeus up there by himself, isolated from everybody else. He says, Zacchaeus, come down from this tree. I'm going to go home with you today. And Zacchaeus does. You know, we said this last week. It's one of the themes. If you want to change your life, you have to make changes in your life. And Zacchaeus did. It's important to understand the context of how this particular scene unfolds. If you've heard me preach about Zacchaeus before, I'm sure you've heard me tell this story about our older son Adam, who's now 47 years old. When he was young, from the minute he could put one foot in front of the other, he became a climber. He'd climb the chairs, he'd climb the divans and the sofas. He'd pull out the drawers and climb in the kitchen and climb up the drawers in order to get onto the drain board, in order to open the refrigerator, in order to knock everything in the refrigerator out. You know this story. Some of you have had children who are climbers, right? And so Adam was a climber. He was always getting in trouble for it. So one day he went to Sunday school, and when he came home, his mother said, Adam, what did you study in Sunday school today? Adam said, well, we studied about a man named Zacchaeus. And she said, what did you learn? He said, I learned that Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and I'm not going to sing it for you. A wee little man, he climbed up into a sycamore tree, and Jesus came along and saw him up there, and he said, Zacchaeus, you come down out of that tree this very moment. He had been in that situation before. But look, this is how a lot of people think about God, isn't it? A lot of people think about God as being an angry parent. God's up there someplace looking down on us, spying on us, trying to catch us doing something wrong. Zacchaeus, you come down out of that tree, trying to catch us doing something wrong. That's not who Jesus was at all. Jesus never, ever encourages us to follow him by making us scared of him. The only ones who were scared of Jesus were the ones who killed him. The ones who followed Jesus were the ones who heard him say, I love you. That's how I think about this moment in this particular story. You know, last week we read about the rich young ruler, and we read from Mark. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell the story, but only Mark puts this phrase in. When the rich young ruler was getting ready to turn around and walk away from Jesus, we are told that Jesus looked at him and he loved him. It didn't make any difference to Jesus in terms of his love for the rich young ruler. He wanted more for the rich young ruler, but he loved him either way. And those aren't the words used in this particular text, but that's what is taking place. When Jesus arrives at the trunk of that sycamore tree and he looks up at Zacchaeus, Luke could have said it this way: he looked at Zacchaeus and he loved him. And he invited him to come down from that tree. Zacchaeus, I want to go home with you. I want a relationship with you. This man, so despised by everybody else, was loved by Jesus. And that was the moment his life was changed. Jesus didn't demand it of him. It's just that his life was changed. If you wanted to change your life, change some of the things in your life, right? And Zacchaeus looks at Jesus and he says, if I've defrauded anybody, I'll pay them back fourfold. Half of what I have, I'll give to the poor. It's the symbolic power of this that's most important. Jesus had been generous to him, and now he was ready to live a life of passion and joy and generosity. This was the moment his life was changed. I was thinking about this last night, and I got to thinking about our bulletin cover, the graphic on our bulletin cover. Did you look at it this morning? I called Ben Chambliss. I'm always doing this to Ben. I called him at the last minute. I said, can you get a slide of the graphic on the bulletin cover? He said, sure. So we'll put it up here for you. We've had this up there for 3 weeks, and it never occurred to me, but I started thinking about it. If you read the New Testament, what Jesus preaches about more than anything else is the kingdom of God. It's over and over and over again that Jesus preaches about the kingdom of God. And for Jesus, as we pointed out last week, the kingdom of God is not in the life to come. The kingdom of God is both in the life to come and in the life we live right here and now. And Jesus believed, and Paul believed, and the great theologians who came after Paul have always believed that at our best, when we're in a relationship with God, in a loving relationship with God, we can live with at least 1 foot in the kingdom of God. And I thought about this graphic. I said, this is just perfect. This road dividing the two ways of life. On the one hand, we see the green, and the grass is growing. It's fertile. The sun is out. On the other hand, we see the dryness and the drought. Life all shriveled up. That's where a lot of us live, isn't it? A lot of the time on the left side of the road, where we want to live, is on the right side of the road in the kingdom of God, where we find joy and passion. It's real important to be clear about this. We don't live in this life entirely in the kingdom of God. Even Jesus went through the wilderness. Even Jesus had a drought, a wilderness experience. If you read about the lives of the saints, almost every one of the saints has written about what they call the dark night of the soul. A time when they felt separated from God. A time when the depression was almost overwhelming, where the darkness engulfed their lives. So let's be clear about that. We go through those times when we're living on the left side of the road. But the invitation of Jesus is to step onto the right side of the road, to live in the kingdom of God. And when you read about Jesus and the kingdom of God, 2 things will always, always be true. It will be about a deeper relationship with Jesus, or a deeper relationship with God, and a richer relationship with other people. We said it last week, there's no such thing as a personal relationship with Jesus. You have a relationship with Jesus. Jesus is going to bring a lot of people into your life. They're going to be poor people and disenfranchised people. They're going to be rich people and powerful people. They're going to be famous people and anonymous people. Jesus is going to bring these people into your life. And those things will always be true on the right side of the road in the kingdom of God. A deeper relationship with God, and a richer relationship with all the people that God has brought into your life. It happened for Zacchaeus. If you want to change your life, make some changes in your life. Hear the words that Jesus inevitably speaks to you. I love you. And the invitation, follow me, step into the kingdom of God, and your life will be changed. May it be true for you, for me.